All right. Good morning, everybody, or good just slightly afternoon for our folks on the East Coast. Thank you so much for joining us. I already see a lot of familiar names, so this is awesome. So there are some Trellis company colleagues here, and as well as folks from all across the country. Again, thank you so much for joining us on this very special webinar about supporting men of color at minority serving institutions. To let everyone know today, everyone in attendance either is a Trellis Company employee or ECMC or Ascendium. We are very happy to be partnering with all of the agencies that support the minority serving institutions across the country. So thank you so much for joining us. Every single other person in the room today is a working professional at a minority serving institution somewhere in the South or the East Coast or the Midwest. So thank you so much for being a part of this community and joining us today to talk about this very important topic. In my role as a support consultant, my name is Zach Taylor. I work predominantly with minority serving institutions in Texas and Louisiana and Georgia and Alabama. And I hear from a lot of my colleagues and professionals working at those institutions, where are the men? How can we better support men at our institutions? It comes up time and time again. Those of y'all who are working on the enrollment management side, we know that 2025, there's going to be a little bit of an enrollment cliff in higher education. And right now, institutions are trying their best to recruit and support minoritized students who historically have not had access to higher education. And the data is going to bear out, and the professionals that are joining me today are going to talk about the gaps in access and equity specifically for men of color attending MSIs, and that is who you are today in our audience. So we're so glad that you've joined us. 2 or 3 kind of quick tech notes is one, we have an audio transcript on today. So if you want to disconnect from audio at any time, feel free to. We're going to keep the transcripts on, especially for our folks who are hard of hearing and who may have a disability. We've got your back today. We're going to keep that transcript on for you, as well as upload the transcript with the video when the video is cleaned up in about a week or so. You'll get a follow-up email from me when the video will be ready and the audio transcript, so you can access that no matter what ability you may be coming from. Secondly, we can take Q&As at any time in the Q&A section. A colleague who has joined today will be answering the Q&As. They will introduce themselves in a second, but don't hold anything back. We have a very precious now 58 minutes with these folks. We're going to optimize this time, so please use the Q&A feature. Ask your question. The worst question that there is the one you don't ask because you don't get an answer. So please ask that question. If you want to say hello as well to everyone in the Q&A or to say hello in the chat, please feel free to. I know there are folks, there might be 5 or 6 of you from some schools. I saw almost 20 of y'all from some schools. So thank you so much for kind of joining this as a professional development opportunity for your entire institution. That's what it's all about. That's what I know the folks on the call with me today are totally on board with, this institutional transformation and change. And it's so kind of heartwarming to see so many folks from the same school doing this together. So I'm going to give everyone just a few more minutes to get locked in here, get you a late coffee or an early lunch. We had over 200 folks register, and we want to make sure everyone has time to get in and get settled down here. We see hello from Savannah State. Hello, Savannah State. Good to see you. Yeah, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from in the chat. Jarvis Christian in East Texas and Hawkins. Good to see you this morning. Hi, Linda. Thank you for joining today. And as we're going through introductions, again, those of you who joined late, just a reminder, please use the Q&A feature right away if you'd like to. Ask your questions, and someone from the team will answer that question as soon as they can. We're also going to come back at the very end of the presentation today, and there will be a Q&A section, and we'll be able to ask Q&As and have your questions answered then. We're seeing all over the country. We got Amarillo, Southern and Shreveport, La Coudray, and Hayward. I've been to Hayward. I know where Hayward is. I know, Emmett, you know where Hayward is. Grambling State, all over the country. Awesome. Well, what a great community that we have. San Antonio College. Lisa, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a bit, but good to see you today. Austin Community College, Atlanta Tech, ASU Mid-South. I could go on, but we're going to transition to our speakers here who have a lot more to say than I do. So With no further ado, I will introduce Dr. Emmett Campos, Dr. Kenneth Davis, Dr. Jorge Bermicki, Jace Cugia, and Rodrigo Aguayo. Good evening, or I'm sorry, good morning, gentlemen, and introduce yourselves and talk to us today about this critically important topic that we're all here to learn more about.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you we're so grateful to Dr. Zach Taylor for allowing us to spend a little time with you this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at. And we welcome the opportunity to tell our story. Again, it's great to see folks represented from across the country. And I spent some time in Wisconsin, so it's always nice to see Wisconsin folks to join us in these presentations. I was a UW-Madison graduate back in the day. I won't say when. That'll probably date me, but it was a great 15 years there in Madison, and I got to travel around. So it's great to see folks from Wisconsin, folks from other parts of the country join us, as well as a number of institutions representing Texas. I am the director of Project MALES in the Texas Ed Consortium. I appreciate somebody promoting me to exec director. That's actually Dr. Victor Sines, but we'll share a little bit about Dr. Sines, who's one of our founders. But I am the director of Project MALES in the Texas Ed Consortia. And joining me, we are honored to have Dr. Kenneth Davis, who's the area superintendent of Houston ISD. Houston ISD is one of our consortia partners. You're going to be hearing more about our Texas Ed Consortia for male students of color. And we're going to ask Dr. Davis to speak a little bit about his work as a member of the consortia and also the fine work that he's doing there serving men of color at Houston ISD. Also with us is Rodrigo Aguayo. He's one of our doctoral students, and he also runs our mentoring program. So you're going to be hearing more about our mentoring program. That's one of our intervention strategies, and you'll be hearing about that program. And then, last but not least, of course, Jace Cugia. Jace Cugia is also one of our doctoral students and also helps lead our research work. And behind the scenes, you're not going to see one of our other members of our staff is Jorge Bermicki. I want to do a shout out to Dr. Bermicki, who's a recent graduate of our program. And he's going to be moving on to great things at Howard University. And so that's why we do the work that we do. We engage with the young men at the middle and high school level and continue throughout that pipeline through K-12, higher ed, community college, university. And then in some cases, we graduate them as PhDers. And Dr. Bermicki is a proud graduate of our program. So, and Dr. Bermicki is going to be behind the scenes taking Q&A from folks as we transition to that part of the program. We're going to spend part of this hour with you presenting about the work that we do, but we want to reserve a lot of time for some Q&A for dialogue. And so this is about having a conversation with folks that are joining us. And hopefully this is the beginning of that conversation. If you've not been part of our presentations in the past, hopefully that's the beginning of a conversation that we'll continue to have beyond this presentation, because again, we have a number of initiatives that we conduct. While we're focused in Texas, our reach is beyond the state of Texas as well. And one of the great things, if there's something great to be said about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact, is there's a lot a lot of challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic presented. It also presented us with opportunities. And one of the opportunities we're going to talk about is our Project MALES webinar series that we kicked off back in April of last year. And that allowed us to extend our reach beyond the state of Texas. And so there'll be opportunities, if you want to continue to collaborate with us, to join us on those webinars and to become perhaps a member of that consortia, a friend of the consortia, right? If you're not in the state of Texas. So I want to, as we begin these our presentations, we always begin with a land acknowledgement. So if we can move to that next slide. All right, we always begin our presentations with a land acknowledgement that recognizes our native indigenous communities here in Texas. So I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on indigenous land and like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Carrizo, Comecrudo, Hualtiltecan, Caddo, Tonkawa, Comanche, Lipan Apache, Alabama, Coshada, Kickapoo, Chihuahua, Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have been part of these lands and territories in Texas here on Turtle Island. And so it's important that we recognize our indigenous and native communities whose lands we now occupy. I also want to acknowledge some key members of our team. Uh, our presenters today represent part of that team, but some of you who may be familiar with Project Males may recognize this gentleman on the left. Those are the founders of Project Males about 10 years ago. We just, and I don't know if you can see this on my shirt, but I'm wearing a polo that acknowledges and recognizes the 10-year anniversary. We had a celebration about a month ago, a virtual event where we celebrated our 10 years doing this work. And that all began 10 years, of course, with the founding of Project Males. Dr. Victor Saenz and Dr. Luis Panjuan. Dr. Panjuan is a professor at Texas A&M University, and Dr. Victor Saenz is department chair here in the higher ed program, also a professor at UT. And so they founded the project 10 years ago with a publication that some of you may be familiar with, The Vanishing Latino Male in Higher Ed. And that's really where it all began, with that publication. And it was a way to address the gap in Latinx male research. There have been work done by a number of research centers across the country on black males and the challenges they face in K-12 and higher ed, but very little work had been done on Latinx males. And so they've been doing some work and got the attention of the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Ed, also a couple of foundation partners. I'm going to share a little bit about those foundation partners here in the next slide, but they stepped up and supported the commission of that paper. And so our thought partners are, of course, Trellis Foundation, who's hosting this. They stepped up and supported our work from the very beginning. And we call them thought partners because in addition to funding and support, financial support, they also participate in many of our activities, our institutes and summits and retreats. And so they're thought partners in the sense that they participate in those conversations around these issues, addressing those challenges and the opportunities that are out there for our young men. Also, from the very beginning of the work that we've been doing in terms of financial support and also thought partners is the Greater Texas Foundation. They stepped up also early on to support this work. About 4 years ago, the Kresge Foundation joined us, and they've since renewed their support for another 3 years. So we're very excited to have the Kresge Foundation, who's based in the Midwest, also in Michigan, to support our work and also participate in the conversations around these issues that our young men face. Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board was a member from the very beginning who supported our work over the years. A couple of years ago, we were fortunate enough to secure some federal grants, and that's OJJDP, who supports our work with mentoring. And so we were excited to receive some federal grant support in addition to our foundation support. Now we're housed within the Division of Diversity Community Engagement. The Division of Diversity Community Engagement houses about 60 programs that are focused on DEI, on diversity, inclusion, and engagement work. And so we're one of 60 programs in that division. And the division is a space within the University of Texas. Of course, the University of Texas is a large institution, but it provides us with space to be able to do that work. They actually provide us with physical space and also some staff support. But again, most of our operations costs and most of our staffing is supported by these foundations. Of course, I mentioned Texas A&M University. Dr. Luis Panjuan is a professor there, and they've been a longtime partner in the work that we do. We'll be talking a little bit more about the Texas Ed Consortium. That's a 30-member consortium made up of ISDs, community colleges, and universities. We'll share a little bit more about the consortium here in a moment. And then you'll see at the bottom many of our school district partners. And these are partners that where we're able to provide mentoring support, mentoring service, and you'll be hearing more about that mentoring work from Rodrigo when he presents on the mentoring program. And these are some of the partners that we work with to deliver our mentoring program, and you'll hear more about that here in a moment. I want to turn now to and I'm going to hand this off to Jace Kujia. Jace is going to share a little bit of context before we actually talk and do a deep dive into the work that we do, the three initiatives and some of the new initiatives that we're now engaging in. We typically share some data points, the data slides that underscore the challenges that our young men face. A lot of times we'll get questions when we do these presentations about why are we serving boys and men of color? Why focus on Latinx males or African American males, Native American and Asian Pacific Islander males? Well, typically our response is through a sharing of data points. And so this kind of captures some of the challenges that our young men face in terms of graduation rates, persistent rates. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jason. He's going to share a little bit about the data that we present in these presentations that kind of sets the context for the work that we do. And also, we're going to share a little bit about our approach and our research and programmatic lens. There's a lot of deficit narratives and deficit stories that are told about our young men, and so we counter those narratives through a strength and asset-based approach in the work that we do. And so Jason's going to share a little bit about the data and also about our approach to the work that we do. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and let him share these two slides with you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Campos. As Dr. Campos mentioned, we just really wanted to briefly show just some data to really contextualize kind of the issue at hand and to really understand what drives our work, right? We're trying to make data-informed decisions and how we're using data to leverage how we're accessing practices and policies to better support boys and young men of color. And so as you can see in the two tables, the top chart or table, if you will, is specifically for Hispanic males, and the bottom is for Black males. On the left-hand side, that's 2010, and on the right, that's 2020, right? And so we're trying to compare and contrast in that 10-year span how these numbers in terms of enrollment or post-secondary educational enrollment has changed. And for the most part, if you're looking from associate's degree to post-bachelor degrees, those percentages have somewhat increased, right? And so that's reflective of new initiatives, more resources, more intention behind institutions supporting boys and young men of color. Although they're marginal, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, in that there's some positive change that we're seeing. Unfortunately, when we're looking specifically at some college and no degree, those numbers have more or less persisted, right? They've been very stagnant. And that these students, specifically Hispanic males and Black males, they're stopping out at rates that they were 10 years ago. Nothing has really changed. Specifically, if we're looking at Hispanic males, the percentage of students who have stopped out has actually increased. And although there was a slight decrease for Black males, it's more or less, again, remained stagnant. And although these are 2020 numbers, we have yet to see, right, the full implications of the pandemic that we're still in and how that's going to impact degree attainment and degree enrollment going forward for boys and young men of color. And so we just wanted to provide this quick, brief table that was actually based off of our most recent research digest, which we'll touch upon later. But I will take this opportunity to invite you all to visit our website and check out some of our reports and briefs of such that will detail about this information, disaggregated data for boys and young men of color in Texas and nationally as well. Also, as Dr. Campos mentioned, we figured that we would share kind of just our brief approach to our work. And Dr. Campos kind of touched upon this, but these are some of the phrases that have historically been used when we're talking about, boys and young men of color, specifically Black and Latino or Hispanic male students, right? There's a crisis, at risk, culturally damaged. They don't care about their education. They need to be saved, right? And all of this more or less is kind of this deficit narratives. And we want to push back against that specifically because when you're talking about these types of framing, it puts the onus or the responsibility on the student. But when you're looking at the research and talking with the students, it is very apparent that there's specific institutional practices and policies that are actually creating barriers for their participation and eventual degree attainment. And so, as Dr. Campos mentioned, instead of a deficit narrative, we are approaching things with an asset-based perspective, right? Students' culture, their experience, community cultural wealth, things that are specific to the student, how institutions can leverage those experiences, those identities that will aid and help them, you know, persist and attain their degrees in higher education. But that was just a kind of a brief overview on how Project Males and approaches its work working with boys and young men of color, and how we are pushing it back against these deficit narratives that have really followed these communities and boys for quite some time.
Thank you, Jace. So as Jace referenced also, we're going to be posting on the chat and at the end of our presentation links to our website. And you can find a lot more information, a lot more data at our Project Males website. We have that organized along these lines of these three initiatives that I'm going to be talking about. That is our response to these challenges that our boys and men of color face. The data points that Jace shared with you, the challenges that they face. And so, as I mentioned early in the presentation, it all began about 10 years ago with that publication. And since that time, we've grown that one publication to an extensive research agenda focused on Latinx males. It's focused on Latinx males. It's not exclusive to Latinx males because we have a number of researchers that are also doing work on Black males and our Afro-Latinx males as well. But our focus is Latinx males P16 pipeline. And we've grown that one publication to a research institute, not a physical space per se, it's more of a virtual center, but it's made up of two research teams, one based at the University of Texas and also led by Dr. Victor Steins and Dr. Jorge Bermecki and Jay Scugia, and a number of our doctoral students. And also we have a research team led by Dr. Luis Ponjuan at A&M. And we've also, in addition to those research teams, we've added a network of who we call research faculty affiliates. These are research fellows that are focused on advancing that research agenda. A lot of these research affiliates are maybe their sole researcher on their institution, and they're spread across the country at a number of tier one research institutions and doing work on Latinx males on their respective institution. And so we've grown that network to 50 plus affiliates, and we typically will convene them and at conferences that we present at AHI and ARA and a number of other conference presentations, and we convene members of our network. And we were also able to convene them back in 2018. We had about 30 member a network at that time, and we were able to convene 30 of our members. We had planned on actually convening them this past year in April in Arizona, but of course COVID-19 happened and we had to postpone that convening. But again, we continue to grow that network, and Jace will speak a little bit more about that here in a moment in more detail. And we also mentioned the Texas Ed Consortium for Male Students of Color. I'll be speaking more about that here in a moment as well, and I'll ask Dr. Davis to join us in that conversation. And I'll just say at this point that it's about 30 member consortia, and we meet in institutes and summits, and it's an opportunity for us to also build another type of learning community as the affiliate network is. We speak about them in terms of learning communities, and so this is a consortia learning community of sort that we're able to convene to have conversations around these issues. And last but not least, of course, our mentoring program. Student mentoring program. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Rodrigo to share the work that he does leading that student mentoring program. We refer to that in many ways as the heart and soul of our program because that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so I'm going to hand it over to Rodrigo. He's going to share a little bit more detail about their program. Rodrigo?
Thank you, Dr. Campos. As I share about the student mentoring program, as the Dr. Campos and Jace mentioned, all of our work began in 2011, and 2011 has been a year that has marked 10 years with serving our student population here at UT Austin. I'd like to address that although UT Austin is not an MSI, it's working towards being one. I believe that this year we've been closer to the mark of being an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, and we're working towards I think establishing our presence as an NPZ. Currently, we're serving 70 undergraduate students. These are students that are coming in from across the state, for the most part, different majors across the university. They are students working towards a degree, but also working towards giving back. Uh, we're proud to say that although UT Austin is continues to be a predominantly white institution, our students, for the most part, are students of color. So our programming is to focus on serving them and how ultimately having them get their degree and having them go out and mentor the young men that we're serving, that will ultimately hopefully go to the Hispanic serving institutions, the MSIs, across the state of Texas. Currently, we're serving 330 young men. This is some of the numbers that are pre-COVID, and we're looking to continue to work post-COVID as we're looking to transition back. Our mentoring sessions are between 30 minutes to an hour, which is what we've identified as the optimal time to support our student population, as well as not being intrusive to their academics, intrusive to their regular class load. Our conversations are based off of critical mentoring, social and emotional learning, and restorative practices. This is some of the work that has been done by folk across the country, like within our district as well, that has shown to support these student populations. That if you're interested in more research and more, resources on this, Dr. Tori Weinstein's book, Critical Mentoring, is one of the things that we would recommend you to read, as it's a foundational piece for that guides our work. One of the big important things that we understand in serving our student population, specific at the university, is the institutionalizing of programming, specifically our courses. So as of now, we've have our impact class, which is a 1 hour course taught by the through the College of Liberal Arts by our graduate students, which has been going on, and it's going to be on its 8th year. And this is a class where the students get college credit, are able to check in with our staff, are able to have that support, and get college credit that's going to work towards a degree. With this in mind, this is where we bring in our training. This is where we bring in our monthly guest speakers, and this is a way for them to not only engage with our program, but uh, get a small stipend, get college degree, and work towards their end goal at UT Austin. We're proud to say that for the most part, our programming is student ran, as our graduate students teach the class. Our undergraduate students are the leaders of the Project Male Student Org, and we take a lot of their work into consideration when we're developing new programming. Um, we want to recognize that this year we graduated 16 students, and this is one of those things that is an asset and a limitation, right? We would wish to continue to graduate more students, but our capacity is only at 70 students, right? This is as much as our programming has allowed us to work with. We know that there are students at UT Austin that are identifying with different marginalized identities that we would want to continue to serve, but we know that at the time we're only capable of serving 17. Although we're very proud that we graduated 16, and that's some of the work that we've done throughout the years that got us a recognition by Excelencia Net. We'll be happy to share any more questions at the end on as far as diving deeper into our work in the mentoring program, but I know that we have lots to cover, so I'll give it back to the team.
Thank you, Rod, for that. Yes, this is why we do the work that we do. You know, we can't take full credit for those 60 graduates, but certainly we have some work to do to fill those 16 spaces. But I'm sure Rod will be up for that. Okay, so briefly, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Davis here. But again, just a little bit more about our consortia. We're almost 30 members representing school districts, community colleges, and universities. We launched this in 2013 with 17 members. We grew it to about 4 years ago to about 45 members, and then we moved into a consortia fee model. And for that consortia fee, these members are able to access professional development institutes. We do them in the spring and fall. We also have our signature event, which is our Texas Male Student Leadership Summit, where we invite our consortium partners to bring their young men that they work with. the criteria for being a member is that you're in the state of Texas, and also you have some kind of minority male initiative on your campus. And so this is where we convene our young men over 2 days on the UT campus, and it's a really powerful 2 days of workshops and keynote speakers. A very exciting time, and I know that Dr. Davis has brought his young men and his team to that the summit. And so I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Davis, and I'll let him share a little bit about his experience being a member of the consortia, and also to share the great work that he's doing through a number of initiatives that he's helped establish. So, Dr. Davis.
Morning, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Campos. I'm truly excited to be here and to share my experiences. And the consortium has really been a catalyst in helping me move forward with the work that we're doing here in HISD. Some of the mentoring opportunities that we've created, and I'll share one about the girls, but I'll start with the guys since this is about the males. Ascending to Men, and that's one of the programs that we started maybe a couple of years ago under the superintendent, Dr. Grenita Lathan's guidance. She wanted programs that we would be able to reach out to our young men to kind of guide them and provide leadership opportunities for them, but also provide other opportunities for them to see males in the work of education and so on. And so when we took our boys to the consortium, we took about, I think it was about 15, 16 boys that we took the first year. And just being in the room with other males of color, them looking around and just kind of noticing, wow, I'm not the only one, right? Because oftentimes our young men feel as though they're so isolated in their own worlds, they don't really get to see a lot of people in the work of education and in the work of educating other men of color. And so that was really an eye-opening experience for them, something they still speak of it to this day when I see them. It's like, oh, wow, do we get to go back? I'm like, no, 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 we got to take another group this time. So they're excited about that. And then, looking back at it, I can definitely share this. When you look at those photos at the bottom, the one on the far left, we branched out to continue the work of the Ascending to Men project by having a specific opportunity to recognize these young men in the work that they're doing. They received scholarships, but only that, they received tuxedos to be able to go to a formal dance and to be able to be recognized for their work by other men of color. And that was really, an astonishing event. And we've tried to do that every year since then. And then we have our Miles Ahead Scholars Program, which is it's almost like an elite program, but it really isn't. These are our high performing males at three of our high schools. I mean, these young men are bright, resilient, and their lives, if you look at them, their lives have not been easy, but they are continuously working to move forward. And through this mentoring program, we've had opportunities to take them to some of the tier one colleges and universities around the country, so they can see what their potential could possibly be if they choose to move forward. And the young men need these opportunities to be able to see other men of color in these roles so that they can aspire to be and to be able to move beyond some of their challenges in their own personal communities and even in our school districts and our state, et cetera. So what we're seeing now, when we're talking about equity and moves of equity for our young men across the country and the catalyst that has happened with George Floyd and so many others, they have a place to say, I have a voice and I matter. And so these programs actually give these young men an opportunity to move forward, to be able to see what's available for them, excuse me, and to be able to set goals that they may not have aspired to set prior, and even some of them have obtained them. And if you see the young men on the far right, and those are our Miles Ahead scholars. This is their typical uniform when they present themselves, and then they are able to go to some of the colleges and universities virtual now, to be able to say, if I participate in this college, who looks like me that's there? And so that's critical for them to see a reflection of themselves in the world now, and we're just taking that opportunity and move forward. And the consortium has started a lot of that work around how do we inspire and invigorate and get our young men involved in certain things that they may not have necessarily had before, and to know that their reach is far beyond their communities when they participate and engage in activities like this. And so that's for our students. If you go to the next slide, please. And so when we're looking at some of the problems that has been mentioned in the research that Jace has mentioned, and we all are probably familiar with, some of the challenges are absences of role models, increasing disciplinary actions, their low attendance or lower graduation rates, low post-secondary education enrollment, and lack of leadership capacity in their community in order to engage them for opportunities that they so well deserve. And so these are some of the responses that our programs provide for them. We provide mentoring on a daily basis. We have a curriculum that's specific to the work that they'll do to build relationships and talk about their aspirations and how to move forward. Because oftentimes we present the boys opportunities, but we never tell them how to do it. And so we provide them those opportunities, even enrollment into college, getting their parents involved and so on. For some of our kids, that's brand new to them, and they only heard of it or may not even have heard of it. So we provide that opportunity for them to be able to do that. And then we couldn't do this work alone. So we have affiliated partnerships, just like the consortium with UT and so many others around the city that have actually stepped into the work with us to help us educate these young men and provide opportunities for them. And then we have a special one that occurred this week with 50 Cent, the rapper 50 Cent Curtis Jackson. He is partnering with us to be able to start an entrepreneurship program for our young men. And we add young women in that program as well. And that'll start in the fall. But I also want to mention in my closing that on June 5th, and I wish I could show it, but I'll definitely drop it in the chat to share. We have an opportunity for the men in our district to see other men in the district of color and others to be able to see what are our other opportunities within our leadership programs that we have, because we know that all men that come into the district to do work aren't just teachers. They have other roles. They're in the legal department. They're in the curriculum department. They're all over our district and they provide that. But our children, our students, don't always get to see them in those roles. So we're actually going to provide an opportunity for our men in leadership to see other men of color and other in leadership positions so they can have aspirations to continue their work and track in the business of education. We don't want to lose anyone. We want people to know that you don't have to go into another profession to be able to move up and increase your goals and your vision and even increase your salaries to be able to do some things within education. So we're opening up that opportunity, and it's the Men's Leadership Conference that's coming on June 5th. So thank you, Dr. Campos, for that. Allow me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Yeah, we're going to be sharing more information about that, and other events are coming. So I'm sure you're starting to see a theme here, the importance of role models, the importance of creating space for these young men to actually participate and see other folks that look like them, that may have shared experiences, that are now in leadership roles. And so we're going to share some takeaways here as we transition to our Q&A, but we want to finish with a couple of slides, and then we'll move into that Q&A part of our presentation. So Jace is going to share a little bit more about our research work, and then we'll move into the Q&A portion of our presentation.
Great, thanks, Dr. Campos. So as we in our presentation, right, we touched upon the mentoring, we touched upon the consortium. So the third branch, if you will, of Project MALES is really the Research Institute. And Dr. Campos did a great job kind of briefly talking about it earlier, and how we have a national network of faculty and research affiliates, across the nation at various institutions, that are all engaged in this work in some way or fashion, right? Supporting boys and young men of color. And so at the Research Institute, one of our goals, and one of the things that drive what we do, is to raise the visibility of the research on boys and young men of color, provide that voice, or amplify the voice in the research so that it's accessible and more disseminatable to practitioners, administrators, and other scholars. And so we do that again with our faculty and research affiliates. Something that I think we're on our third cohort now is our graduate scholars program, in which we select various emerging scholars. Last year we inducted four scholars, in which they're at various institutions engaging in this work. But really a neat thing is that we're able to connect them with some of the faculty across our network and provide that type of mentorship for these emerging scholars, right? We're connecting the national, not just state or local, but national level, and engaging in this collective conversation, if you will, on research on boys and men of color. And if you have more information, if you want more information about the Graduate Scholars Program, which we had actually a webinar earlier this week, please visit our website. There is a financial incentive and also just an opportunity for scholars to hopefully publish something with their mentor. But a large part of our Research Institute is also like, what are deliverables, right? What are tangible things that we can connect our research, the institution's research, and how is that going to inform policy and practice? And so these are some of the things that we, over the years, over our course of the 10 years at Project MALES, the things that we've been able to produce, right? We have the ACE Viewpoints Brief. We have Ensuring the Success of Latino Males in Higher Education. We have various policy briefs. We actually just published our third research digest. And then almost on a monthly basis, every month and a half or so, we're publishing our Project Males research briefs, in which we're taking, research articles or chapters, 30 pages or whatnot, and we're condensing that into a one-page front and back so that it's easily disseminated across our network, again, to practitioners, scholars, administrators. It's really important for us that we're doing this research, gathering information, but making it accessible and applicable to inform practices and policies, again, to support boys and young men of color. And I'll just share, keeping in mind of time, that we recently did a study that incorporated 10 of our consortium members, all of which were MSI institutions. Most were Hispanic serving institutions. But we were able to kind of take a deep dive and learn about their institution. And, they all had some form or fashion of a minority male initiative. So a men of color program is how we refer to them. And so I'll just share 3 quick takeaways as we transition to kind of action steps that Dr. Campos will highlight. But as as I briefly share some of these, keep in mind on how, the question, right, that centers this webinar is, right, how can we better support boys and young men of color in the educational pipeline, right? And so when we're meeting with and collecting data at these institutions about their men of color programs and their minority male initiatives, one of the salient findings was that there's a lot of tension within the institution surrounding minority male initiatives or men of color programs, right? There's a lot of questions and pushback, if you will, on why serve specifically Latinos, but also that gender component, right? The males. And so what we found is it's really important to collect data and disaggregated data. And that's been a really powerful tool for some programs to really leverage more resources and support for their initiative. Although that wasn't the case for all institutions, right? And so there's this constant pushback in regards to these men of color programs, but also in engaging in other scholarly conversations. Anytime you're asking for funding for marginalized populations, there's going to be pushback, right? If you're doing this for this population, why not for that? And so again, we just want to underscore the importance of collecting data, but also being able to disaggregate that. Another salient finding that we found was that there's different, I guess, maybe not stages, because it's not necessarily linear, but men of color programs or minority male initiatives. Some are grassroots initiatives, and some receive a lot of institutional support, right? And so there's kind of this range. And so it was really interesting to see how for a men of color program who has a lot of institutional support, what does that look like? They're receiving not only financial resources, but they're also receiving specific designated spaces on campus for their boys and young men of color on campus to meet, right? To create that space, that safe area for them, especially considering that, higher education historically is probably not for students of color and marginalized students. And so it's really important. But then on the other side of the spectrum, right, there's a lack of resources, underfunded, understaffed. And quite frankly, a lot of our programs are run more or less out of volunteer work, right? These are institutional leaders or administrators that have other roles. However, they see the value in supporting, boys and young men of color. And so they step into these roles, but they're not paid for this role. And so they're underfunded. And so it's just really interesting to kind of see how these programs exist and the various levels of capacity based on how their level of support from their institutions, and how that can really impact the way that they're serving their students. And last but not least, our third finding was that, each men of color program kind of had a different definition of what does it mean, like, to serve their students, right? It's some programs really focused on the academics. And so whether that was specifically tutoring or academic mentoring, or it was, soft skills, leadership development. There was a kind of a wide range of focuses for men of color programs, although virtually all programs provided some level of mentorship, tutoring, and in some cases, the goal at the community college level per se would be to transfer to a four-year institution. And so it was just really interesting to see kind of the wide range and I guess multifaceted approaches that men of color programs have in serving and supporting boys and young men of color. So again, I'll invite you all to visit our website for more information, but I just want to segue on as we identify some of our key findings to Dr. Campos, who will outline some of the actionable steps that we have for you outlined for you all as we wrap up this presentation and go into Q&A.
Thank you, Jace, for that. So again, there's been a couple of questions in the chat and in the Q&A feature, and I believe that Jorge has shared those links. All this information is accessible and free and available to anybody who's interested. And of course, thank you, Jace, for sharing that latest study that we've conducted. And I want to do a shout out to Dr. Gina Garcia, because we relied on her text of Becoming Hispanic Serving Institutions. If you don't already know about that text, you need to purchase that text. Really powerful, a powerful analysis and study on Hispanic serving institutions and what it really means to serve Latinx students. And so I would encourage you to look that text up, because we relied on her text for the study that we conducted that Jason was referring to. And so as we move into the Q&A, we wanted to share some action steps, some things that you need to be thinking about. And we've kind of been addressing and alluding to some of these action steps. Dr. Davis shared some of the lessons that and some of the strategies that they've adopted to serve their men of color. And of course, we've also been doing that over the last 10 years. And one of the questions that you need to be addressing, of course, we've got asked lots of critical questions, right? Well, what does that mean? One of the things it means is that you need to ask about your data, right, at your institution. Are you disaggregating data by race and gender? Talk to your institutional research folks and ask them, are you tracking these kinds of educational outcomes? First-year retention, fall re-enrollment, credit earned, retention across majors. These are the kind of questions that help you get to the type of data that you need in order to be able to address these challenges and to be able to present this data to your supervisors, the higher ups, to make your case that this is actually a problem. And I'm sure you'll find that as you start collecting that data, you're going to point out some gaps that exist at your institution. And so it's really important to disaggregate that data by race and gender. And by the way, we have resources on our website that can help you tackle that issue. And so Dr. Luis Panjuan has produced some what we call capacity building tools and activities, CBTAs, that can help you address those challenges of disaggregating data, so we can support you in those kinds of efforts. Another question that you need to be asking is, are you actively recruiting and hiring diverse faculty and administrators across all departments? I'm sure one of the data points that we can certainly share with you is the lack of representation at K-12 and higher ed for male faculty or male teachers. And so that's a very real issue. That's a long-term issue that we're also addressing at Project MALES. Our immediate intervention strategy is of course, mentoring. But we also have adopted some long-term strategies, and one of them is how to address the lack of representation for male faculty, male of color faculty. Another thing that we can also support you with is faculty training on racial equity, implicit bias, disparate learning styles for students. Dr. Panjuan has also led training at a number of our consortium member institutions that we've been able to address these issues as faculty at the University of North Texas, for example. We conducted some trainings there. We also conducted trainings at Texas State University. And so we can support you in those kinds of efforts. We've created content and workshops that address these topics and issues. And another important action step that you need to address. And then the other thing we'll mention, of course, is, are there support programs or partnerships in place for your men of color? Dr. Davis has mentioned some of the work that he's doing through his intervention strategies. We mentioned our mentoring program. Those are the kind of support programs, but there are many others, right? And I mentioned before, as a consortium member, you need to have a minority male initiative on your campus. And so we share with you some of those minority male initiatives that our partners have adopted. MBK program at Fort Worth ISD, led by Ricky Clark, and has and also, of course, our mentoring program. Sacman has a wonderful program, a mentoring program. And to Jace's point, right, this is not an adjunct to, say, the work that, say, a faculty may be doing or an administrator may be doing. This Sacman program actually has dedicated resources and dedicated staff and dedicated space. And so leadership at the institution really has to step up and provide that to really make these programs work. And then another program that we want to mention is Sam Houston State University, their elite program. We had them join us at one of our Project Males webinars that we led about a month ago, and we highlighted their program, and also a program at Texas A&M Commerce. And so these are the kind of initiatives that you really need to create, and we can of course share those models and those programs and share more information about how they were created. And then lastly, expand notions of conversation about gender equity, right? This isn't a zero-sum game. Dr. Davis pointed out that they also support initiatives that support their female students. And so, we partner with other organizations like Comi Madre and Latinitas here in the Austin area to do this work collectively, right? We're in our lane and we focus on males of color, but we also collaborate and support other efforts to support our Latinx sisters and our African American sisters as well. And so we want to now turn to our Q&A. We have about 10 minutes. And I know that that Jorge has been collecting some of the questions that folks have been posing. So we're going to turn now to Q&A, and then we're going to end by sharing a couple of activities that we have planned here in the next couple of months. Dr. Davis has an activity that he referenced, and also we have a webinar coming up in June. But we'll entertain questions, Q&A, and I believe Zach was going to step in and help us with that. Jorge has been moderating the chat and the Q&A. So what are some of the questions that folks have been asking?
Yeah, one question came to me in the chat. What have institutions of higher ed done to train faculty to better support men of color? Dr. Campos, you'd mentioned kind of the gaps in making sure that there are male teachers at the K-12 level and faculty members at the higher ed level. How have institutions trained the faculty to better support this population?
Well, Zach, that's a great question. And I think I referenced earlier that we've created, based on the research that we've conducted with our consortium partners and the excellent research that's out there, we conducted and created what we call capacity building tools and activities. And we've created workshops where we address these issues, and we're happy to present this information, share this information, at a minimum, share the information that we have on our website. And so if you want to email us, we can share some of those strategies, but we also can take it to the extra step and actually present to your faculty. So if you have the opportunity for us to be able to come in front of your faculty and present on these issues, we'd be happy to do that. Dr. Luis Panjuan leads those efforts and has done workshops, as I referenced before, to some of our consortium partners, our University of North Texas that I mentioned, and Texas A&M University. And we're also creating some of these CBTAs that are deliverable online as well. And so Dr. Panjuan has been working with Austin Community College, with Dr. DeBaca there, Lydia DeBaca, to create online training programs and CBTAs. And so we'd be happy to share some of that with you, some of those training opportunities.
Great. And then one more came in the chat. What about when you're doing the data disaggregation, you find that gap? And that gap then needs to be somehow conveyed to executive leadership so there can be some sort of buy-in and some sort of resourcing behind the initiative. How do folks get that executive buy-in to actually make change?
Well, that's certainly a challenge for sure to get the attention. But I don't know if Jace or Dr. Davis, your experience in your institutions with getting in front of the higher ups to make your case, right? That this is a real issue. And so I'm gonna ask Dr. Davis perhaps to share his experience.
Great. I think that's a great question because now that I've transitioned to this role of being an area superintendent, being one of the considered higher ups, things come to me now. So I have to, and I still have to make the case to Dr. Lathan. So taking the data seriously about what's equitable in our school district has been a very strong conversation. We've had several opportunities to look at equitable moves, equity moves, about student programming, about staffing requirements in certain areas that we're missing. Where our student population reflects one social demographic, and then our staff reflects another, and how we make those changes so that our students can see that we are actually serious about making our district more equitable in terms of demographics and culture and so on. We've had to have some serious conversations brought to the table about we're not reflective of our student population and our staffing for some of our schools. What do we need to do to make sure that that's right? And even in our community, some of the same conversations. Our parents bring those conversations to the table all the time. We have a predominantly bilingual Hispanic culture at the school, but you're hiring an African American person who doesn't speak Spanish. Help us with this, so that we can have some reflection of our communities, and vice versa in some other communities. So those conversations definitely need to happen. If it and the leadership needs to have an open mind about what the world looks like today. There are, and oftentimes, we've heard in the past, or at least I have, that we just need to find the right person that's a good fit for the role and to be able to be representative of what we want in that position. And oftentimes we just don't look hard enough, far enough to be able to get some people that are reflective of what's needed in order to be able to fill those positions. So absolutely, those conversations are important and critical. And the higher ups, me being one of them, need to have a broader perspective on, what is it that we really need to do in order to make it feel, look, and be reflective of who we are as a people, and then what is needed from our students in our communities.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Yeah, Dr. Davis points out finding an ally, right? There are allies out there, advocates in those higher roles, right? Administrative roles. And so find those advocates and allies and partner up with them to help share that data. And the other thing about what's happened this past year with COVID-19, it's created opportunities. I think it's underscored the challenges that a lot of our students of color face. Right, we know those challenges. We've been working in those spaces for many years, but it's really thrown light on those discrepancies and gaps. The other thing I'll mention is, of course, there's an opportunity here with the Black Lives Movement and everything that's happened with our African American community and the challenges they face with violence in their communities, right? Police violence. And so that's created opportunities and hopefully gotten the attention of some of those higher ups and created opportunities perhaps that weren't there before, that they'll maybe more willing to listen to you when you share that data. So I think this is a good moment to approach your leadership and share that data and make those cases for why these programs are needed, right? Why the support is needed for boys and men of color.
And one more comment from a participant in the chat is, have you thought about connecting with minority organizations such as the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators and TAPI to recruit viable teachers and administrators?
I'll just briefly say that, we partner with many folks, right? We're invited to participate and share the work that we do in conferences like the organization that you just mentioned, Zach, that person mentioned. So, our partnership extends beyond the thought partners that we mentioned, beyond our consortium members, right? We're participants and members of a number of national organizations and movements and initiatives. I mentioned earlier MBK in Fort Worth. We've been a longtime member of My Brother's Keeper Rise Boys Men of Color, an initiative led by Dr. Sean Harper, Encore. A lot of the presentations that we do on our research, we get in front of not only academic conferences, but a lot of practitioner conferences. And so this is about building that network. And so we're always looking for opportunities to partner with other folks to do this work, because we can't do it alone. And I think that was one of the takeaways, I think, is that it takes a team approach, a team effort, right? Texas is a big state, and we got to partner with a lot of folks. The scale and the scope of these challenges are large. And so hopefully through the creation of these initiatives, and we're building on these initiatives that I mentioned before. We have a Maymester program. Dr. Saenz and I are going to be traveling to Pueblo, Mexico. This is our way of kind of internationalizing Project Males. And so we're going to be traveling to Pueblo with a number of students. We're the only faculty-led program actually that was approved to travel abroad. We have some courses that we've created over the years. And so I know there was a couple of questions about the courses that we offer through Impact. We'd be happy to share more information about how we created that service learning class, and also the signature course that Dr. Saenz and I teach that Rodrigo Guayo is also part of, and he's going to be also joining us in Puebla. So I think we're pretty much out of time, Zach. We're at a noon hour, and I don't want to step on people's lunch for those of us that are in Central Standard Time, including our own. But we do have a couple of, a slide here of some events that are coming up. Dr. Davis, did you want to share anything about your leadership side?
Yes, sir. Thank you again, Dr. Campos. Just a reminder that, and I dropped in the chat the link to the summit, but it's on June 5th from 9:30 to 3:30. It is a free conference, so please come and join us. We have excellent presentations that are coming. We have Principal, his name escapes me. My apologies. Kufele, Principal Kufele, he's coming. He's our keynote speaker, and so it's going to be a fun day just for the men. And we just want everyone to just know that they can come and participate. So come join us.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And just briefly, we have a Project Males webinar coming up on June 25th. You can find more information at that link. And hopefully you can join us and continue this conversation. And we'll have a summit in August. We'll be sharing more information about our Texas Male Student Leadership Summit. That's going to be a virtual event. And so please stay in touch, folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, crew. And like we said earlier, the recording of this webinar, it's going to be cleaned up and probably ready to go by next week. So you'll get a follow-up email from me with the audio transcription of this webinar and the cleaned up video. So y'all will be able to share with your colleagues. And also in the chat right now, there's been a lot of great links and resources. I'll make sure to follow up with the guys and make sure we have all those consolidated in that follow-up email, so you can access all the great resources and you can pass those on to your team members wherever you are, whatever institution you're at in this country, to make sure that everyone has access to that content. I don't know if y'all were listening super carefully about the price points here, but everything on that website was free for y'all to access. It's not like Dr. Campos and his crew is gatekeeping this information. It is open for you to use because they believe in the work and they believe in the change. And sometimes that change has to be kind of open access to get folks going. And so thank you so much for making those resources so economically accessible for a lot of our schools. It's a huge help to the community. And thank you so much for making that so accessible. So on behalf of the Project Males crew and all of the MSIs and professionals that attended with us today, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everyone. And I will send a follow-up email with all of the resources and the recording in due time. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your Thursday and take care.